The government of the Virgin Islands has facilitated a series of workshops and public consultation meetings to promote and improve turtle conservation. And this was done in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Association of Reef Keepers, and the United Kingdom based Marine Conservation Society. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, I am your GIS host, Sanjay Greenwich. And today I'm privileged to be joined by Miss Kia Soares from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. I'm Deep Sangira, a conservation officer from the Marine Conservation Society, and Dr. Shannon Gore, the director of ARC. And thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sanjay. Great to be here.
Great. Welcome. And I'm going to start with Mr. Sangira today. And can you offer a bit of insight about the STEEL project and tell us a bit of what your involvement has been?
Sure. So the STEEL project stands for Sustaining Turtles, Environment, Economies and Livelihoods. And it's a partnership project, as you said, involving Marine Conservation Society from the UK, Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, Association of Reef Keepers, and also the University of Exeter in the UK. It's a 3-year project funded by the Darwin Plus initiative from the UK government. And it's essentially about trying to update turtle fishery legislation and the Sea Turtle Recovery Action Plan for the Virgin Islands. And there's quite a few components to it. So Dr. Gore from ARC has been working with the University of Exeter to try and collect scientific information. So that's going in, looking at in-water populations of turtles, doing flipper tagging studies, looking at nesting turtle trends, trying to build up a picture of the turtle populations here in the BVI. The other component is being run by the Marine Conservation Society and Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and that's looking at the human dimension of turtles here in the Virgin Islands. And we've been doing a lot of work with the communities here all across the Virgin Islands, understanding their relationships with turtles, how they're used, and what people's views and needs are with regards to turtles in the Virgin Islands here for the future.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm Deep. And now we're going to move to Miss Soares. Can you tell us a bit about why turtle conservation in the Virgin Islands is important, especially given the cultural significance of turtle fishing?
Sure. So the turtle fishery is optional, but we actually culturally consume it as locals here and even foreigners, because we do get people that come from away that do actually want to partake in meals. Therefore, it's extremely important to me and the department as well to ensure that the fishery remains sustainable, because just like everything else, you don't want to have something and then it become extinct or there's no control over it, therefore one day we don't have it. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're trying to avoid. Being a part of Virgin Islands culture, it's a delicacy for our Easter festivals especially, and our Christmas meals as well. So I think it's very important.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight. And now, Dr. Gore, we'll move on to you now. And we know it's important to ensure that decisions are informed, especially those decisions that affect our lives and that go on to shape policy. So can you tell us a bit about how the research that would have been conducted and how it lends to this particular project, the STEEL project?
Okay, so you've heard Amdeep talk about the flipper tagging. So what we are doing is we have key index foraging sites or turtle hotspots that we continually monitor, because we cannot go out and catch every single turtle in the BVI. It's just not possible.
Right.
But when we go back to these same sites, if we start seeing trends, any kind of changes that's going on in these 6 locations, then we know there's something else is going on. So for example, when we first started doing the flipper tagging 20 years ago, we were catching a lot of hawksbills, like twice as many hawksbills that what we're catching now. And literally, in the past 3 years, we've only caught 6. And that really shows that there's a major decline in that species. And that's actually backed up by what the fishermen are saying as well. So we're looking at the populations within those sites, but we're also looking at the habitats to see how they're changing. A really good example is, in 2020, during the pandemic, there were no boats out there. And a lot of the seagrass beds were recovering from, in the past. But over those 3 years, we're starting to see a lot of anchor scarring. So we know that, some habitats are changing as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, leading on from what you would have mentioned, Kia, can you tell us about the department's involvement and the role that the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries has played in improving turtle conservation?
Well, I would say our role would be basically monitoring and enforcement. We are partnered with the Darwin Project underneath the steel. We also work with CFAS, and I work along with Shannon as well, doing the turtle tagging, and we monitor, those hotspots, like she said, that way. And we are now trying to more bring awareness to fishers, because speaking to some, it's like, yeah, it's a culture, but a lot of them don't know a lot still in the background of a turtle fishery, especially when it comes to them being sustainable. So, we're trying to basically remind the public about closed seasons, how important it is, and not even if the season is closed, should you be even having it in your personal possession, right? So that, because then there's no proof to prove when you got it. So it's just, in regulations, even though it's closed season, we don't want you having it, we don't need you buying it, we don't need you selling it, and we're just trying to regulate that as well, and also trying to review the regulations as well, hopefully to see how we can maybe adjust for the better.
I think Kia is actually underplaying the role of the government of the Virgin Islands in this project. They've been a massive help, especially in the last few weeks where we've been running these workshops across the Virgin Islands, playing this film that you're going to be talking about, yes. Turtles in the Virgin Islands, Balancing Conservation and Culture. We've been going out to these workshops. We've been trying to collect the views and values that people attach to turtles all across the Virgin Islands. And, Kia has been the driving force in this, getting the message out to fishers, to the communities, and not just Kia, the whole of the department. You yourself, Sanjay, were at a workshop yesterday in Joost van Dyke with about 6 Department of Agriculture and Fisheries staff. That's why we're all bleary-eyed now this morning, because we just got off a boat. But the support from the government has been fantastic, seeing them so visible and seeing them partaking and facilitating these workshops and directly engaging with the resource users has been great to see. So yeah, they've had a massive role in this project.
Yeah, thank you for that input. It's important for persons to understand that this is really a collaborative effort, and we all must do our part.
Absolutely, we can't all do it, and there's a lot of different people across the Virgin Islands got different relationships with turtles. It's only going to work if we all come together.
Thank you. And now, Dr. Gore would have mentioned about some of the impact that we as humans and our lifestyles and how it affects turtles. So can you tell us a bit about what the average resident in the BVI can do to play their role in turtle conservation?
Right now, we actually need people out on beaches. It is the leatherback nesting season. Our resident leatherback guru, Austin Freeman, he's out every single night, but he needs a lot of help. So beaches like Lambert, Josiah's, Rogues, and Trunk Bay, if we can get people out there, every night, we're trying to make sure that we tag every single turtle that comes in, so that we know what the population is. Also, if you do live on any nesting beach or within any of those bays, start looking at your lighting, because lighting is a big issue. And we need amber lights, or the lights need to be turned down. Those are things that, just the average person can do. Or if you see an injured turtle, if you see tracks, let us know. Just message us on our Facebook page.
Okay. Andy?
Sorry, is there anything that, Shannon, you talked about the habitat scarring that you're seeing. I'm just wondering if there's any tourists that are listening to this message right now that, is there anything that they could do as well to support the welfare of turtles and turtle conservation here?
Well, for people out on the water, it's, if you do see an injured turtle, or if you are visiting a bay, if you see the tracks, let us know. But, a big thing is anchoring. Either use a mooring, or if you're going to anchor, make sure that it's in sand, and make sure that your chain is not the anchor may be in the sand, but it's when the chain is 100 feet across a reef or a seagrass bed. That's when a lot of damage can happen.
Okay, great. And Dr. Gray, can you tell us how long this research has been being collected and so on?
Well, for this project, it's been kind of specifically the past 3 years. However, when we started doing the in-water tagging 20 years ago for another project, it was Turtles of the Caribbean Overseas Territories, and it was another UK-funded grant. We've just been able to keep up the turtle tagging, and that's why we have such great information, especially about this change in the species abundance. But literally, we've been doing it for 20 years, and hopefully we can continue doing it because in 10 years there might be another shift, and that's really important information to have. And it's in a way it's a stock assessment as well. So for the fishery.
Okay. And now, relatedly, Mr. Sangira, after all the research has been collected and compiled and assessed, how can the people in the British Virgin Islands hope to benefit from this wealth of knowledge that we've been accumulating?
Sure. So I'd like to say that an initial driver of this project was that, as well as the information that Shannon had been collecting over the last 20 years, there was a real need to update the legislation. It was outdated. So this project is providing brand new evidence, not just scientifically, but also socially as well. Now, we've been doing these workshops, the Community Voice Method workshops, where we've been showing this film. That has been a way of understanding and documenting the various values that people have when it comes to turtles in the Virgin Islands. It could be that, certain people fish for turtles, certain people consume turtles, sell them in their restaurants, or they use them for their water sports business. And what we now have to do is in the next few months we have to analyse all that information, the social sciences from the workshops and the information collected by Dr. Shannon Gore and University of Exeter. And we're going to come up with a set of recommendations. And I can't actually say what these recommendations are because we're yet to do that work. But I think the thing about this project is it's interdisciplinary. So what we will produce will hopefully acknowledge the ways that people use turtles in the Virgin Islands, and that's in many different ways, but also have cutting edge science to bring in recommendations that that are contemporary, that are more responsible, that are sustainable. And if you look at projects where we have used this model, so for example in the Turks and Caicos Islands, the way people had benefited from there is still having access to a fishery, but it's the most regulated fishery in the world, and there's now signs that that fishery could be in the early stages of recovering, especially with its turtle nesting population. So the way that people can benefit is that it will still hopefully acknowledge all the different myriad ways of people use turtles in the Virgin Islands. It will have the turtle conservation as a priority, and it will use contemporary cutting-edge evidence, to kind of supplement this.
Right, and it's important, I believe, for the recommendations to reflect the specific realities of a particular space instead of using like a generalized approach. So I think that's very useful as well. Now, going back to what you would have mentioned, the Marine Conservation Society, you have been utilizing the Community Voice Method to show the film entitled Turtles in the Virgin Islands, Balancing Conservation and Culture. Can you each tell me your view on the film and what you thought it was able to achieve and just your overall take on that part of the workshop?
So I have to go first.
Okay, great.
So basically, the Community Voice Method is a method which reaches deeply into communities. It's a documentary film method, documents people's views, values, relationships with a particular resource, and then that overriding film that is then produced is then played at workshops like we've been doing, and then we get a lot of community input, and that is analysed to then support the social angle of a particular resource issue. For example, here it's, what do we do with turtles? So that's kind of how it's being used in the Virgin Islands, and happily pass it over to Kia and Shannon about their impressions of the method.
It's the first time I've used this method, and kind of going through the process, it was really interesting to see everybody's different views and whatnot. But it was the first night when we presented it. And, I saw two very different groups of people coming in, and I just thought, this could go one of two ways. And, by the end of the night, to see the two different groups really working together and talking and kind of coming up with the solutions it was incredible to see. And it made me very proud of, like, how it turned out, so.
Okay, so what are your general thoughts about the film itself?
I think it is really good. It really does. It captures, the way it was processed. Everybody had the exact same questions. And, the key points were brought out. And whoever, either said it in that period of time or whoever said it, the funniest way or just kind of the clearest, quickest way, it was put into the film. And it really captured so many different views. And it really makes you think, like, views that I had never even thought of. So it really just gives you a new perspective.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with Shannon. The video was amazing. I mean, you got views from everyone, and just looking at different communities and the fact that everyone in a community basically had the same perspective on the culture side as well, but then you also understand that they do want to preserve it, which was very important, especially on behalf of our department. And the community voice method, I think, was brilliant, because I think when you're targeting a certain group of people, for example, fishers, they want the most comfortable setting. They don't want to be in a suit and tie. They want to sit down around a table or maybe under a tree, and they want to be able to give you their opinion. That's in their element. And the more you can make them comfortable, the better outcome you will get out of any group discussion from them. And this whole workshop, I think, opened the eyes to a lot of different people, even us at the department, because, we got so much feedback. We got so many people saying, I wanted the fishery to close completely, but now I understand why we should just make it sustainable. And we also have fishermen who were so, strongly cultured into it, that they can also understand where those who want to conserve it are coming from too. So after this, the video, after the workshop, I think a lot of people actually have a mutual understanding right now for the whole sustainability and the conservation for these turtles.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ms. Soares. And I think that in general, this has been very informative and interesting. I think that this is a relevant place for us to conclude, providing that nobody else has anything to add. Something to add, Andy? Sure, go ahead.
So, we've come to the end of this consultation period now. In May, we will be releasing this film, Turtles in the Virgin Islands, Balancing Conservation and Culture. Right? Yeah, by the public, via the government of the Virgin Islands. It'll be online. And there'll also be an online survey as well, where people can give their views on how they see the future of turtle conservation and management. So do look out for that. And then that information as well will be used in supporting the recommendations that we as a project will be presenting to the government of the Virgin Islands at the end of September.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Great. And now for the Department of Information and Public Relations, I am your host, Sanjay Greenwich.